And on the 8th day, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker. So God made a farmer.
Howdy folks, Darren back with you here at Cross Timbers Farm. Welcome to 8th Day Chronicles. Glad to have you with us today on this beautiful spring day. This is the day the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Wow, what a beautiful day. Feel super privileged to have the health and the means to be out here on the farm today. Wonderful day, good day, makes you glad to be alive. Hay season is almost upon us. It's coming in fast. And if you're a hay producer like myself, hay's been on your mind lately. I hope it has. This is the year to turn your hay season around. If you had a bad year last year in hay season, or your hay quality has been lacking, this is the year to turn it around. In no way, shape, or form am I dismissing the old-timers' way of doing hay. And when I use the term old-timers, the old farmers, I am in no way, shape, or form disrespecting them. Technology and studies were about topics like hay and biology and forage biology and things of that nature were just not available then, and technology had not progressed at that point. One way you might look at that was, well, that's a good thing. Technology is not always fantastic, but when applied the right way, it's a good thing. And it allows us to learn and to more understand our hay crop and more understand what makes our livestock perform better, as in maintaining their weight, gaining weight, growing out that livestock in a more efficient manner. And a lot of that goes back to your hay production. And hay production has advanced leaps and bounds because of this technology. These professors and people in labs and scientists, they have developed protocols and tests, and now we understand more about plant growth, cool season, warm season grasses, legumes. We understand more about their chemical makeup, how they grow when they are cut for hay, how that hay transitions from growing green forage to dry hay matter. There's been a lot of studies, and this has greatly benefited the hay farmer if you're keeping up. If you're not keeping up with the current studies and what's available to the hay farmer, the knowledge and information, you're going to get left behind. Ignorance about your hay crop happens to all of us. I've been very ignorant about hay in the past. From years ago, having my hay cut at the wrong time of year, more concerned about yield than I was quality. But you know, when you're ignorant about something, you can educate yourself. Take the time to stop and do some research and do some studying, do some reading especially like during the off season through the winter. Educate yourself on what makes high quality premium hay, and always striving to better your farm and your hay production and your livestock. Stupidity is knowing better, doing something and knowing better and doing it anyway. Ignorance is you just don't know no better. Strive to educate yourself the best you can on anything you're going at. whether it be your livestock, your cattle, your horses, your farm sustainability, your soil, and your hay. In some recent videos, we've discussed when to cut your hay. When are you going to end up with the highest nutritional value that you possibly can for your hay crop? That should be the goal of every hay farmer, to produce the highest quality hay that you possibly can. That higher quality hay, you will feed less of it. Your animals and your livestock will maintain weight, gain weight. Overall, their performance level will be better. Your gains for your farm will increase on a higher quality feed. And oftentimes that high quality is just a matter of cutting it at the proper time. If you watched our video on your cutting your hay at the wrong time, you know we talked about the crossroads, when to cut your hay, yield versus nutritional value. And today we're going to dive in what to do after you've cut that hay. Okay, I cut my hay at the proper time. I cut it when it's at a high nutritional value and when the yield is optimal for that nutritional value, where I'm going to get the best of both worlds. Okay, what do I do now? My hay's down. Okay, let's talk just a little bit about hay mowers and the effects of the hay mower on your quality, and why a hay mower has any kind of effect whatsoever. Let's talk about that very briefly. Most hay mowers, drum mowers, disc mowers, hay binds, when you mow your hay, they're going to leave a swath of hay. A lot of them will put that hay down, those grasses down, into almost a windrow. When you look behind you as you go through cutting, all that hay forage is kind of pushed in and cut. The nature of those blades turning opposites are pushing that hay almost into a windrow. I know drum mowers do. I know disc mowers will. Hay binds, when they go through the crimpers, if your hay bind has crimpers, it'll push that out into almost into a windrow behind that mower. Now that hay went from standing forage to cut hay, and now it's thick. It's pushed that together, and now you have almost like a windrow. You have hay on top, layers of it laying there. The hay on top's getting sun, everything else underneath is covered and dark, no dry down. A sickle bar mower, in my opinion, is probably your very best small scale hay mower to use, as far as when you cut that hay, keeping it spread out as far as it's cutting. The sickle bar mower will go through and just lay it straight over. It's not pulling it in and kicking it out the back, so to speak, into a windrow. It's laying it down right where it was cut and not moving it together. However, personal opinion, a sickle bar mower is probably pretty low on my list of choices for a hay mower, because talk to people that use sickle bar mowers and have in the past, and you'll find a love-hate relationship with those things. They're very finicky. They're not real user-friendly. They clog. You see people getting off and having to unclog the hay off of them. They're just a love-hate relationship. So a sickle bar mower is personally not my choice. I think there's better options out there, although I do really like the way a sickle bar mower mows and lays that hay over very nicely with minimal leaf damage, anything to your forage and your crop. a lot higher maintenance. Okay, you've cut your hay. It's down. The clock starts ticking. When you cut your forage grasses, they almost immediately start respiring. By respiring, I mean they're losing moisture, and along with that moisture, they are losing nutrients. When you first cut your hay, you're at about somewhere around 80% moisture in those hay grasses. And that grass immediately starts to respire. It is losing moisture, it is losing nutrients. During the day, your forage grasses, through sunlight, will build sugars and starches through the leaves of that grass. They are taking in carbon dioxide, expelling oxygen, and they are building up sugars and starches. When the sun goes down and it starts to get dark, and through the night, that grass will consume those sugars and starches to feed on through the night. The next morning, the sugars and starch levels are back low. Through the day, they will build until darkness, and then they will feed on them again. It's a daily process. Those cool season grass leaves have pores that's called stomatal, and those pores will open and close. The opening and closing of the stomatal allows for that plant to breathe, to consume carbon dioxide and expel oxygen, and also to leak moisture. On super hot days, that plant can expel moisture and keep it damp so the sun doesn't just bake it. Generally speaking, the later in the day, on a sunny day, is the higher sugar and starch content and nutrients in that hay. When that plant has had sunlight to build those sugars and starches, and that's why we cut our hay here on our farm late afternoon. Late afternoon is a prime time to cut your hay due to the higher levels of sugars and starches in that grass. So when you come along and cut it later in the day, the levels are higher. It's going to respire and lose some of those nutrients. You may lose the same amount, but there's more in it to begin with, so you're actually losing less. Your hay is going to be higher in sugars and starches by cutting of late afternoon and early evening. You're going along with your hay mower and you're mowing your hay. 3 in the afternoon, perfect timing. As soon as that hay's cut, it begins to respire. It is losing moisture and nutrients. The stomatal pore openings on the leaves, and they're usually on the, from what I understand, on the underside of those leaves. Sugars and starches in your hay grasses, those grasses, when they're actively growing in the field, will consume those sugars and starches at night. Mower comes through, cuts them down. Okay, your mower is pushing that cut hay into a swath. You've got a thin layer of grasses that's just been cut on top, and then you have that thick swath. All that hay underneath suddenly got cut, has more grasses on top of it. The underneath is getting no sunlight. That grass thinks it's all of a sudden got dark. It's going to start consuming those starches and sugars. You want to uncover that hay and get it spread out the best you can as quickly as possible. The highest forage quality and the best total digestible nutrients you need to limit respiratory loss of your hay and loss of those nutrients during dry down. And you need to limit that loss as quickly as you can by means of spreading that hay out into the sunlight as soon as you can after cutting. When you cut your hay at about 80%, from all studies I've read, you need to get that hay dried down to about 60% as fast as you can. From 80 to 60, you need to lose 20% of that moisture as fast as you possibly can. Getting it out of that swath and getting it spread into the sunlight. None of it covered by other grasses on top of it, like into a windrow. It needs spread out as soon as and as quickly as possible. No later than 24 hours. I would actually prefer to, if it was possible, to mow my hay of the afternoon and ted it before dark. If you use a hay mower, such as I do as a drum mower, that leave a windrow swath, you need to ted that hay as soon as possible. My opinion, when you have cut your hay, and if your hay mower leaves a windrow or a pretty heaped up swath behind your mower, ted that hay as soon as possible. And subsequent teddings, ted very gently. Leaf shatter and leaf loss can really affect your yield. It can really affect your quality. Leaf loss is the last thing we want to happen. And because that's where most of the nutritional value of that hay is in those leaves. And we want to protect those leaves the best we can. But also, you look at, well, I'm just not going to ted. I don't want that leaf shatter in any legumes I may have, in my red clover or my alfalfa or whatever. Even if you just grow grass hay, leaf loss can and will occur if you go at tedding too aggressively. Well, should I even ted? Yes, I think so. I think tedding, especially if you have a hay mower that leaves your hay in a narrow swath or a windrow almost, you need to ted that hay ASAP, in my opinion. Preferably the same day, if you can. And probably again the next day. The plant thinks it's dark, and the plant is trying to consume those sugars and starches. Those pores will close, and that plant will try to consume as much of those sugars and starches as it can to stay alive, to try to heal itself. And you're losing nutritional value out of your hay leaps and bounds. Spread it out as quickly as possible to keep that plant in the sunlight, so it is thinking in its mind, that plant is thinking, I'm still trying to store sugars and starches and all these nutrients because I'm going to need them tonight. And you will lose less. Your hay will be of a higher quality. Total nutritional value of that hay will stay high instead of losing nutritional value at a rapid rate. A shout out to Dr. Dan Undersander, a hay and forage professor. I watched a webinar that Dr. Undersander put on in cooperation with the Maryland and Delaware State Cooperative Extension offices. They had a hay and forage conference, and produced this webinar on retaining a high level of nutritional value in your hay through scientific studies, passing that on through their studies to the farmers, the hay farmers, and the dairy and beef and livestock industry in those areas. And Dr. Undersander discussed this at length about the swath of your mowers and getting that spread out, and the stomatal pore openings of the grasses opening and closing due to darkness and sunlight, and preserving as high of a nutritional level in that hay as you can through the hay process. Very enlightening, and an excellent webinar, and I learned a lot there. It was very, very interesting. So the takeaways from the webinar and through the studies that I tried to educate myself on afterwards through various resources. When you cut that hay, get it out of that swath as fast as you can. Get it spread out into that sunlight. The stomatal openings, or the pores in that hay, will be affected by the sunlight or lack thereof because it's covered in a swath. You have one little thin layer on top that's in the sunlight, and the rest of it underneath is shaded, and all of a sudden went from daylight while you're cutting it to dark, and those cool season grasses will all of a sudden be fooled into thinking it's dark, and they will start consuming sugars and starches, and your nutrients and your nutritional value of that hay starts a rapid decline. You can stop that rapid decline by getting that hay spread out into the sun as best you can. Enter a hay tedder. I know folks that cut hay and have for years, and they've never owned a tedder. Never. However, from the information we have today that was not available just a short time ago, as in years, we now know that taking that hay from a swath where part of that hay is underneath in the shade, that we are losing nutritional value of our hay rapidly by staying in those swaths. We need to get that hay spread out as fast as possible. This is an invaluable tool for quality premium hay production. Now, a tedder, in my opinion, can be misused. Ted that hay while it's still green, while it's still pliable, where those tines come along and they kick that hay, the leaf attachment to that stem and that plant is not brittle yet. It still has a moisture content and a pliability to it. The cell walls has not started breaking down of that grass and allowing those leaves to easily shatter from the rest of the plant. Ted it while it's still very green and very pliable, quickly after, in my opinion, after cutting. It will prevent leaf loss. Later teddings, the next day and the day after, if you need to ted your hay again, and I would recommend that especially if you have really thick hay where your hay is still, you have some underneath, it needs flipped around to get into the sun. Ted, once that hay drops down to 60% moisture, ted your hay very gently. Do not go through your hay at 540 RPM or higher, really kicking that hay hard. You need to kick that hay as softly and as easily as possible to prevent leaf shatter and leaf loss. I used to think that tedding your hay was not that, I knew that it really helped the dry down, but I didn't realize how much it prevented nutrient loss of your hay. If you don't have a hay tedder, I would encourage you to strongly look into purchasing and learning about tedding your hay and the benefits of that. Now, you can overdo it. You can ted too much. You can ted when it starts to get into a decent dry down. You can ted way too hard, and the benefits of a tedder are all of a sudden gone. When you cut your hay, it's at around 80% moisture. You want to get that hay dried down to around 60% as fast as possible. Get your hay spread out of those swaths and out of those windrows as fast as possible. Spread out into the sun so those stomatal pores of those leaves will stay open and allow that plant for that moisture to escape and preserve the sugars and starches inside that plant as long as possible. You've put a lot of work into your farm. You've invested quite a bit of money into hay equipment. You've put a lot of sweat equity into your soil. You're growing a good crop of hay. Attention to details will set you apart in your hay production. You will go from average, run-of-the-mill, mediocre hay to premium hay. You will notice the difference in your livestock. You will notice the difference in your hay sales. Attention to detail will set you apart from the rest of the hay for sale or your livestock in your area. A lot of times it's the totality of the circumstances, and it's the little things. This farmer cuts his hay of the mornings. He don't ted, he don't want to spend the fuel, he don't lime his soil, he don't check his pH levels, he don't, you get my drift. Usually you can see the result of that in his bale of hay. Thanks for being with us today here on the farm. We really appreciate it. If you'd subscribe to our channel, God bless you and your family, and I pray that y'all have a fantastic day.